Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by Sophie Krantz today. Sophie is an explorer. So Sophie and I have known each other for a little while, and I'm so excited to have her on. I'll do your bio and you justice, Sophie, by reading that out, and then we'll get into our conversation. But you are an explorer. You're occasionally on mountains, often at sea, and always with business leaders around the world. I love that. And I want to get into a little bit more about that. Sophie brings over 2 decades of experience in international trade, investment, strategic management, having managed projects valued at up to US $1 billion in over 20 countries. Sophie has worked with global Fortune 500 companies, ASX 200 firms, and within the United Nations, cultivating a broad and influential global network. Amazing background there, Sophie, which I know we're going to get into. Your mission is to enhance the strategic capabilities of your clients, enabling them to thrive in today's dynamic global economy. And anyone who's listening that subscribes to your work already will have a sense of the depth that you bring to this topic, around leadership, but also helping leaders, I think, to really think globally. And I know you talk a lot about global ambition. So it's such a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Rita. Delighted to be here.
That bio is so impressive. Could you give our listeners just a rundown? What does a week in the life of Sophie Krantz look like?
A week at the moment is typically in Melbourne, and right now, of course, we're mid-year and middle of winter, but I do travel extensively, and so use Zoom. Zoom is my preferred travel device, so traveling extensively, and that can mean early mornings, late nights. But one of my kind of non-negotiables with clients is if they are international, if they have a headquarters and offices in one other place or many other places, a non-negotiable is we have to have multiple people from around the world in the room, because we want to understand what's happening in the world through the people that we have around the world working with us. And so I'm a little bit of a glutton for punishment with being online at sometimes crazy hours of the day, but it makes the work that I do so much more fulfilling, and it enables clients to understand where they are in the world in a more effective way.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's that bringing people together. And also when you've got that face-to-face connection, there is a deeper level of connection. I know we've all mastered it over the last few years around meeting virtually and doing things, but there is a different level of connection when you can bring people together in a space.
Yeah. It does depend a little bit on the type of company. I find multinationals, so global Fortune 2000 companies that were heavily utilizing video conferencing and so on before the pandemic, they can grapple with working remotely, working with different time zones in a really seamless way, and relationships can be built without being in a physical space together. And then there are others that find it a little bit more challenging because there is a belief that we need to meet in person. And I think what really helps is having something quite concrete to work on. Why are we here? What are the shared outcomes that we're looking to achieve? So a lot of the work I do, for example, is around designing and validating new business models, updating what we do, looking at what do we do locally and how do we potentially expand that globally, and really exploring, what is it if we're the globally dominant player? If we do this better than anyone else globally, what does that look like? If we had $1 billion, what would we spend it on? And through this sort of exploration of where we are and where we could be, we get to know each other as people, and we get to know what the organization could achieve. Often I spend hundreds of hours working with people, and then of course when we finally do meet, and with clients in Asia, it might be going to a karaoke bar, it might be going and having wonderful local meals and so on, and it's absolutely amazing. But there's this very strong sense that we already know each other because we've achieved shared outcomes.
Yeah, and Sophie, you and I know what it's like to get to know each other over karaoke bar, just very quietly. Because obviously that some of the work and how we've collaborated, I guess, with a bunch of other colleagues in the past has us not so much working on shared outcomes, but really it's shared experiences. You're absolutely right. It's fundamental to building that trust and building the connection with people when you can get to know them on a different level before you jump into things like, as you said, designing and validating new business models, which is it's intense work, full of risk, full of opportunity, full of ambition. But if you don't have those connection elements there, I imagine it would make it so much harder to do that kind of work.
Yeah, and that particularly presents itself where we do have people from around the world in the Zoom room or even in the physical room where we have a dominant culture. For example, there are some national cultures that are a lot more confident, let's say. It could be if we're all working in English, which is often the case with the work that I do today, it's typically the case. And we have people who, of course, have a stronger command of English, even though it might be their second language. And so my job, of course, is to meet everyone where they are and take everyone into a better future. And that is breaking down some of the barriers. So absolutely creating the space for everyone to have a voice. And perhaps those people that are a little bit more confident with putting forward their thoughts or their views or giving their reactions in a sort of unfiltered way, it's about building their global leadership capability by enabling and inviting others to have a voice. So for example, when I work with clients in Asia where we have, it could be some team members from China, occasionally Vietnam, those sorts of places where the command of English is potentially not as strong as other parts of Southeast Asia, let's say. I absolutely insist that we have to hear from everybody. And so in all the exercises we do, particularly in the first couple of weeks where we're getting to know each other, it is on us. If, my university level Mandarin does not allow me to conduct business meetings in Mandarin, but we absolutely will hear from everybody. And what we've found is when people believe they can have a voice, and we have to be creative in figuring out the way to invite and welcome that voice. Yes, we can use some technology. It can be a bit disappointing. It can let us down, like the Zoom add-on interpretation. What we can do is things like create visuals. So I've had a team use Canva where they create maps of what they're thinking about using visual tools. Whatever we need to do, it's not at all for me to say, but what I do insist is that everyone has a voice. And as I mentioned, I believe that it's for everyone else to build that leadership capability to invite the voice and the active contribution of people from everywhere in the world. And let's face it, if we've got people from China in the room, this is the world's arguably most important economy. We absolutely need to welcome, invite, and incorporate their ideas and initiatives into what we're doing.
I'd love to get into more of what you do and the type of work that you do for organizations. There's a real sense of intentionality as I hear you speak around ensuring the voices are heard and really being deliberate about ensuring that those voices are heard, because it could be quite easy for a leader. Let's say it's the person who's responsible for the project or the strategic initiative to say, well, I've got one that I've just got tucked away in the bottom drawer and I'll whip it out and I'll do consultation for consultation's sake and bring a group of people together to get their buy-in because I know that that's what I need to do as part of my change management process or stakeholder engagement or whatever it is. But when I hear you speak, there's a real level of commitment and also intentional consultation. And that does require for all of those voices to be heard. How have you dealt in situations where you get the sense that what's happening is a little bit of a process that we're going through as opposed to really and intentionally hearing from everybody that's in the room?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good point. And if I reflect on working at the UN several years ago in international economic development, which was bringing together stakeholders in low income countries, stakeholders from the public and private sectors, that often was the case. And actually, on reflection, I didn't really have the toolkit to manage it well. There's sort of these bigger forces at play, but the world was a bit different then as well, because people could almost justify their position. There were sort of less external factors at play. The world is kind of spinning. It feels like it's spinning and shifting so much faster than it was even 5 years ago. So even though I talk about, or I've spoken about today, bringing people from an organization in the room, I absolutely insist that we get out of the building as well. That in an organization, we don't know it all. And I'm a part of the exponential organization community, and I'm a practitioner in their framework. And one of our sayings is, beware of the expert. Anyone who says, I'm an expert in this, I know this, quite possibly reflecting on the expertise they had last week, particularly if it's in a tech-driven or impacted field. And so where we have leaders or key stakeholders who hold quite strong views and have strong preferences, my job is to enable the leader or the team that I'm working with to understand where are they at and why are they that way? What about this represents success for them? What are the challenges that they're dealing with, and map out those sorts of factors. But then also our job is to influence. And what we do is zoom out to zero in. So we broaden our context by engaging with a wide range of people in order to understand what's beneath the surface, what's beyond the horizon, what aren't we seeing, and how do we then determine the implication of that and bring that back into our organization? And how do we package that up and deliver that in a way that is compelling for this leader that might have its preference? And I will say that there are some interesting kind of quirks that pop up. So, for example, I've learned to have a little faith that we have to influence gently, and we've got to figure out the way. Sometimes time helps. So, for example, I worked with Corporate Innovation Sprint with an oil and gas company here in Australia, and one of our sponsors, we had a couple of them. Every week we had to report back to the sponsors on this business model validation process. And in week 4, they said, this one leader in particular said, "We will never be a technology company." And they kind of gave a very harsh reaction to the presentation. And then in week 7, they said, "If we do not become a technology company, we will cease to exist." So sometimes time helps. And then, much to my kind of my dismay, the reality is, in some parts of the world, I'm a female. I work with a very diverse group of people. Quite often, I work with people who speak English as a second language, of course. They are people of color, very diverse backgrounds, very capable, very hardworking and accomplished. And yet, there are some places, some companies, some industries, some countries where our key recommendations up to a board, for example, need to be made by a American or British Caucasian man, because that's the way the message is best received and it allows us to move forward. And I absolutely hate having to say it. However, I'm really wanting my clients, the individuals that I'm working with, to be focused on the destination. And sometimes we've just got to maneuver through the gates or the checkpoints in the most effective way. Unfortunately, pick our battles.
Yeah. It's hard to hear that in 2024. And yet I'm sure all of us that are listening and even, participating in this conversation, whilst it's hard to listen, you go, yeah, we know that still occurs. There can be an absolute bias around decision-making, communication, spokespeople, spokesmen, and I chose to say spokespeople intentionally, but at the end of the day, a lot of them are still men, which is hard. Like, it's hard to understand that we're still participating in an environment and a climate where that's still the done thing. But I'm so pleased to hear that the groups that you work with, and it sounds, given the global presence that you are working with different people, and I think I can talk about the cognitive diversity, and there must be a richness, Sophie, that comes from having all of those brilliant minds, but also their cultures and experiences that would give it a little bit of a different flavor, I imagine, to how something is being positioned and through their eyes.
Yeah, and what makes us all human and what makes us come together and do our best work, I believe, is when we are mission driven or purpose led to some extent. I'm in the business most of the time, validating business models. So if we're in a business, we absolutely have to make money. Occasionally we have foundation projects and so on that can make a really strong contribution to community and so on. And that's really important as well. But in business, we're here to be commercially successful. And we can do that in ways that are win-win, that are positive sum, as opposed to the winner takes all, zero sum outcomes that are somewhat a legacy of the industrial age. And I love working with people in particular in middle income countries where there's this real sense of our country is growing and going somewhere. And yet they live and breathe socioeconomic, health, environmental challenges that need fixing. And so it's not theoretical. It's not, we need to go commission a study on this. They know that there are people who should be getting an education. They know that there are people who have no access to healthcare. Walking to the office, they may well see that, or they know of it in colleagues or in their own family and so on. And so connecting what we do with something that they care about is what brings us together and puts us on the same page. And that's when I talk about the destination. The destination is, yes, we're going to validate a profitable business model, but yes, we are going to do it in a way that makes the world that much bit better. And also you are finding out more about the sort of leader you want to be and the voice you want to have, the problems you want to solve, and how to go about that in a way where you engage with people globally. You build a global network in a way where you ask questions more than have answers, in a way where you are forming relationships with your peers so that you will be the leaders of tomorrow and you can break through the stuff that we kind of don't want to have to deal with today, but we have to deal with today.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Not that other problems are not real life problems, but some of them are case study-ish. So we've got a commissioner report, as you said, versus, I spent some time in Vietnam only a couple of months ago, and you do get a sense, particularly in areas like Da Nang, where they're only 20 years old and they feel, and they will tell you, that this is, we're growing, and you're starting to see some of those seeds of growth, but there's still so much for them to do, and they're absolutely aware of it. I mean, you've alluded there to some of the qualities or characteristics that you identify with deliberate leadership, and I wanted to get your sense. You work, and I mean, given the background that you've got, which is so extensive, you will have worked with all types of leaders, of large and global organizations, particularly your time at the UN. In your experience, what have you identified are those unique characteristics and experiences that really bring about, deliberate leadership? So leadership that's intentional and on purpose. And how do you see these traits contributing to organizational success?
It's a really good question, Rita. And because we know that there is so much changing in the world, the leaders that I see are having or enabling organizational success are the ones that do adopt this almost a beginner's mindset themselves. And they have this strong curiosity about what's happening in the world. And they do think about where are we and where are we going and where do we want to be and how do we get that in a way that makes them not go alone. And I think there's this sense that they can't, or they're somewhat limited by trying to go alone. And so, for example, there's a leader I work with in Asia who is the CEO of an agricultural business, and they believe that in their lifetime, it will be a criminal offense to slaughter animals. And so they want to get out of that business because they have bigger ambitions in a really positive way. And so it's this looking at where is the world going and what's my role in it. And with that, they recognize that it can be really hard for emerging leaders or anyone in an organization to come forward with ideas, particularly when it's new. So where we have startups, it can be a little bit of a different situation because we're building something new. But where we have traditional organizations, we have typically organizational culture, and then we've got the national culture or the headquarter versus outpost type dynamic. And where we have leaders who are able to bring everyone together and they understand that there are corporate immune responses, there's an attack to new ideas. There can be also stakeholder preferences. There can be these societal responses, and it can be really hard for people to be comfortable with the unknown. So they demonstrate, I don't know, is something you'll hear them say, but let's figure it out. Let's go talk to these people. It's a lot about expanding and it being evident that they're expanding who they know, what they know, and how they work. And how they work is what I do see, and you may well see it as well, Rita. There can be a shift away from conventional management consultants, more to engaging external people like us for internal capability uplift, where we don't want to be told what the world looks like or what we should do, but we want our people to have the ability to do that. And so that's a positive shift. And then there's also this sense of working in a way of promoting and demonstrating experimentation. Okay, if we've got a 90-day innovation cycle, what are we going to do with it? What does success look like? And where we do have some elements of failure, an emphasis on learning from this, and just this spirit of we're not exactly where we could be. Let's figure out where we want to be, but let's do something about it and acknowledge that it needs to be done in an inclusive way.
Yeah, I love that, Sophie, and I've written down in the notes here, strategic foresight. And then the other word that comes to mind for me is futurist. So often, the crystal balling almost, my experience is that leaders have tended to outsource that because we deal in operations, facts, figures, rationale, data, evidence-based. And some of the foresight stuff, it's not that we want a crystal ball, like you want the evidence to back up the view and the sentiment, but some of it is imagination, play, creativity, innovation, curiosity, as you say, and all those things that allow us to go to a different place to where we might have been before. And I think with that comes risk. My experience is some leaders don't want to go there because it's not their jam to go there. And I think they've relied on other teams and, as you say, other consultants to assist them with that. And I think in the day-to-day busyness of even senior leadership, which still has quite an operational focus because you're running the business and you're in the business, like this kind of stuff, it takes time, like, because you kind of got to be looking out, you've got to be digesting information, you've got to be observing, which is not quick. You're not going to get that through a 5-minute snippet of some clip that you see or a little podcast that you might listen to. It takes time. So do you see that tension between that futuristic strategic foresight capability that we want leaders to have is outwards facing, not inwards, but it feels that there's a bit of a tension between that and then running their businesses? What's been your experience around that?
Yeah, so I don't call myself a futurist because I don't feel like I'm cool enough to be one. But,
You are.
but I have a lot of those tools in my toolkit. And so what I find is it's a muscle that needs to be built. And like anything, like if we were to get up tomorrow morning and run a marathon, if we've not been preparing for it, it would be really, really painful and feel unnatural. And we probably wouldn't do very well at it. However, by building up capability in a short sort of sprint-like fashion. So it could be, for example, having a couple of day workshop where we just look at where is the world going and why is there more than what we see actually now that provides the signal of what's coming tomorrow. And then asking those scenario-based questions of what if the future looked like this? Imagine if this amazing outcome happened, or imagine if this really terrible situation arose. What would be the implication? And so it's building the capability in a way where there is sort of intuition that comes with it, sensing that there's more. And a big part of that is to show what I love about taking people to India, China. It's been largely virtually, but I'm running study tours in the next 6 months. What I love about it is giving people something that they can't unsee and unfeel, because then that muscle can't kind of switch off. Yeah. So there's that. And then there's also, you're right, Rita, I feel like a reliance on the news, even really great, there's some really great geopolitical advisors out there that put amazing content out in the world, but it shows the world from a perspective. And what I insist on all of my clients, and this is something I work with some leaders just as a specific program, is that they build their personal advisory board. So what are the biggest trends, threats, technologies that are going to shape and shift the world and impact your industry, your company, your organization, and your career? And who are the 5 to 7 people you need to know? Who are these people that are kind of on speed dial? They absolutely need to be global, and they absolutely need to be from places where you have blind spots and biases. So let's look at what are those blind spots and biases. Let's form a value proposition to reach out to people, make a wish list. Who are the 5 to 7 dream people you would have a monthly catch up with virtually, quite possibly, because they're around the world. But you also text them from time to time. They make introductions. They give you insights, strategic intelligence, things that you don't get within the building, you don't get within the organization, you might not even get within the industry, but you absolutely need to have, so that when you have this sense about the future, you've got your own group of people to go that you've validated, that you've vetted, to give you the ability to have their sparring partners, their sounding boards, and then you go back and make a more informed decision. They may well point you through to people in their network so that you're getting additional insights. But I feel like this is sort of the two sides of the equation. It's having this sense of discovery. There's more to this. And then it's having the people that you can go ask questions with and explore together.
Yeah, it's so powerful, because if you think who, and your mind goes to who would those 5 to 7 be. And further than that, though, as you were talking, my mind also went to some of our big issues in this country, like health, like education, particularly higher education, to pick on two that I'm more familiar with. And I think how we just spin our wheels trying to solve problems in a very limited way, really, because we're limited by what we know in this quite small part of the world, like impactful but small, versus kind of going out and having a think and I know it's cliche, but pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Because I think if we keep, it's another cliche, but if we keep swimming in the small pond, that's our visibility. That is the only thing we see. We're not able to imagine a different kind of world if we don't actually go out and see it. Or what I'm hearing you say is surrounding ourselves with those thinkers that can bring that sense of awareness. And we might already have that awareness, because I love that you picked up sensing and intuition. It's this sense of, it's like an itch that I can't help but scratch because it's there. And then surrounding yourself with people that do validate that. And I love also that you added in vetting it, because I think we can all go out to who we assume and presume to be these industry experts, but sometimes media shoving things in our face, which again, then we don't have that more balanced view of what it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Included in the 5 to 7 often is like a young whiz kid that you're just never going to find online anyhow. You just need someone, a series of sort of conversations and introductions to be able to find them. And you're absolutely right. I think what we're talking about, healthcare and education, these are challenges that are indeed global challenges. And so if you were to spend any money on a solution, or just spend any money in these two areas, it just baffles me that you wouldn't look at what's happening globally. My mind just doesn't compute, Rita. And I've had one coffee today. I don't think it's a caffeine shortage. My brain just doesn't understand it. There are innovations. There are people who are investing billions in these spaces. To develop something in isolation of that just does not compute for me. But equally, where's our ambition?
Yeah.
If we develop a solution, if we look at, here's an opportunity to provide better services, better products, to level up our new business models in these spaces, what are new solutions we can bring to the market? Why would we not look at the world as being the potential market for this?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense, because we know, I know disruption is the term that's thrown around, but all eyes are on Australia at times. We're a high income, industrialized market where some businesses make a lot of money. It's not a tough market if you do something well to make money. This is a great market to validate a new idea and bring it to market. If you bring it to market here, of course others are going to notice it, and of course they're going to look at how do they incorporate that as part of their more ambitious global plans to dominate that space.
Well, I mean, Sophie, in your experience, what is it that maybe, and I don't want to kind of hang it on Australia too much, but we're not, and this has been published in various forums, and the sentiment I think is that we're not the most innovative of countries. And I know you've mentioned China, you've mentioned India, and some of those other countries that you work with, and with leaders and organizations at work. But what are you seeing? What is the difference, do you think, with Australia? Because I loved that you mentioned the word ambition. I don't see that hunger and that drive. And I'm sure I'm not the only person to observe that. What do you see as the differentiating factor that puts us where we are versus some of the other really growing economies and the countries where I would go, yeah, you'd absolutely label them as ambitious?
Yeah. I love Australia's ambition on the sporting stage. And so it's an Olympic year. We are going for gold. Absolutely. It will be all over the news. It's all everyone will talk about. And if we don't have a top 5 medal table finish, there'll be public outcry. There'll be, inquiries. We do not lack ambition when it comes to sport. And I wonder if that's because we have a lot of big fish and we play in the big pond. Whereas when it comes to business, it's a small market. It's a tiny market. I find a lot of leaders are just stuck. They're stuck with golden handcuffs. They're in their golden cage, whatever you want to call it. I spent 10 years overseas meeting with trade and finance ministers, making presentations to boards and so on. I came back to Australia and worked for Australia's, at the time, largest investor in China and India, and I negotiated their free trade agreement outcomes for the China and other North Asia free trade agreements and others in the region. And I was told I couldn't do those things. You can't. You're too junior. You can't. That's not possible. And it's like, okay, well, that's you. It's not me, because I've been doing it. And I think it's just because there aren't enough opportunities for people. It really puzzles me, Rita. But I feel like there is this lack of ambition because also, of course, we're the only industrialized country to not enter a recession post GFC. We are the lucky country. We have commodities and we've had strong demand for those commodities. We have an extraordinarily undiversified economy. We're ranked between, I think it's Uganda and Pakistan in the Harvard Innovation Economic Complexity Index. We don't need to take risk.
Yeah.
And yet, do we need to start taking risk? But it's not a muscle that's developed in our leaders because they haven't needed to. And now if they have, if you're later on in your career and you just want to kind of play it safe, I don't think you're going to start taking a lot of risk. And then that within itself is risky because our leaders that are coming up, if they look to those leadership styles and want to mirror them, well, they are significantly going to be impaired on the global stage. They're not going to be able to compete. They're not going to be able to conduct themselves at boardroom tables at the international level, like peers in other parts of the world. So that does concern me.
Yeah, it feels like there's a level of complacency, and maybe there is an artificial ceiling that is hit because of the level of, it's like a capability ceiling. And if you're hanging around with those types of people and that's the experience you're getting, then there's a limitation to that. And I think Australia, more so than some other cultures, but it does suffer from the tall poppy syndrome. It never likes to see anyone kind of stand out too much. And because it's not mateship when you're on a global ambition or domination path, and it's almost like, who do you think you are? Like, really?
Right. And yet we see some amazing people succeeding. Melanie Perkins, co-founder of Canva. I imagine in my mind, if I have a conversation with her, she has not listened to the people and the comments here, and you can't do that. And I know often women in Australia, we are told that we are too ambitious. And look at what ambition can achieve. And the world really is our oyster. And so a little bit of ambition, we could, relabel it curiosity or something else. But what could be possible if we aimed higher? What if we were to be the globally dominant player? And that's not for us to win and everyone else to lose. But what if we did what we did as the very best in the world? What would that look like? And I do believe, and I know that when we work with this intention, it lights people up. It gives people a sense of purpose. It gives people, we are competitive in Australia. Let's tap into that competitive driver. I mean, in 2024, in an Olympic year, why not?
Yeah. When you were told at the time, so coming back from Asia, settling back into Australia, and you negotiating those kinds of agreements that others felt you should not, and I don't know what they knew about your level of capability, how did you respond to that? And what ended up happening? Did you still go ahead and do it?
Yeah, sure. So the role was for me to negotiate the outcomes, and that's what I did, but just my name couldn't go on them to the board, and I couldn't meet with ministers and, all that sort of silly nonsense. I was told, just we have to pick our battles and that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, that's okay, but I'm not going to sit here for the next phase of my career and be limited by the limitations of other people's leadership capability. So that's when I decided to leave the corporate world in Australia and leverage what I know, who I know, and how I work and do my own thing. So I have got a fantastic global network and I do work that I really love on my terms.
Yeah. Amazing. We hear of ghost writers and people kind of doing things in the background, but it would have been so hard for you to watch something go out there and know that you are the person who's done it, but not have that validation publicly. Like, how did that feel for you?
I just felt really disappointed. Like, I can rationalize, and I'm not a particularly emotional person. Like, this is business. I get it. But it just felt high risk. It felt like I can't put my future in the hands of people who make decisions like that, who lead like that. And I felt frustrated by it. And I felt actually what I felt, Rita, was I'd been living and working overseas for 10 years. I came back and I had the biggest dose of culture shock. And I've managed projects in, over 20 countries, countries where everything is different. The language, the religion, the climate, you name it, everything is different. But the biggest culture shock, and I know lots of Australians that live and work overseas, we come home and it's like, whoa, I remembered here as being so different than it is. And It's something I talk about in workshops when I work with Australian clients in very multicultural settings. I talk about the culture shock, including racism. We're a part of Asia. Asia, with our commodity boom, has enabled us to have economic growth, and yet we don't really respect Asia, if I may be so bold. And we don't always, in our workplaces, respect people who are very, very well accomplished. They are here as, leaders in their field. And I've had the person come up to me afterwards, and I don't make a big deal out of it. It's just, this was my lived experience. And people say, wow, it absolutely is the case, but no one ever calls it out. Thank you for calling it out. And so perhaps we need more of that as well, more calling out. Where are we? And what's
Yeah.
actually not good enough? Because it's absolutely going to hold us back.
Yeah. I remember so vividly a year or so ago doing some work in higher education, and we had a female Asian academic who had reached the top level of where she could go. But she said, I walked past a board that had all our pictures on it within one of the corridors in the faculty of the university campus. And she said, I was the only woman of Asian, firstly, one of the only women, it was a STEM area. And secondly, the only Asian woman. She said, I looked at that and I went, well, there's no one like me. And she talked about it with a sense of pride, but also a sense of sadness. She was the only one, and how could that be? Because we're not only geographically so close, but there are so many leaders from those communities and those cultures that are here, but they don't seem to have that same level of presence. I think there's a real opportunity there. And obviously the work, Sophie, that you're doing, I'm hoping create some of those stronger bonds and connections, because you'd be introducing, no doubt, clients and creating those networks, as I know you do through your work. How do you guide leaders in developing and maintaining a deliberate leader mindset? Now, I mean, we've talked today about purpose and being mission driven, and you've talked about destination and the ambition, which I think falls in beautifully within that deliberate leader mindset. There's something very intentional about that. So how do you guide leaders to do this, and even maybe leaders and organizations? Because I imagine a lot of it is about changing cultures, not just individuals.
Yeah. First of all, the organization and the leaders in the organization have to want to understand the world and explore what is the potential for them in the world. So there has to be this positive approach of, we're hungry to do more, or it can be, if we do nothing, we will be dead. There's a sense either way that change is imperative, and it's always somewhat easier where there's a sense of optimism rather than that kind of dread, because that absolutely sets a tone. But there's so many amazing commercial opportunities in the world that have the capability to impact millions or billions of people globally. And as I mentioned before, it's once a leader or any human sees what they've never seen before, they can't unsee it. They can't unfeel it. And when we connect it to who are you and what do you do well as individuals and as an organization? So what are your underlying talents, assets, resources? When we connect them together, it fairly quickly becomes evident that we've got a way forward. And so it's really about saying the world will continue to change. It's going to keep throwing stuff at us. So this time last year, we weren't really talking about AI. Now we can't hide from it. The pandemic, of course, shifted how we work, and business models in some industries shifted significantly in a short space of time. And so it's this idea that we don't need to control everything, and a culture that says, we don't know potentially what's going to come next. War could happen in Asia. We don't want it to happen, but we need this capability to be able to say, we will be okay based on what we know, who we know, and how we work.
Yeah, that's a good message around controlling what we can control. I've written down evolve or die. It's that either face obliteration, and AI is a really good example of that. I think there aren't too many organizations that I work with now that are ignoring it. 12 months ago, I think we had our fair few skeptics that went, oh yeah, like maybe this will just come through and might be a little fad thing, but it's not. It's taken hold so quickly, and there's a reliance on it already that we don't even understand. But someone I was talking to the other day, and they said that now you get into your vehicle, and not only will you say, can you navigate to, because I know if I ever say, and it frustrates me, so I go, oh, well, I'm here. Can you tell me where the nearest cafe is? And it will say, you can't do that while you're driving. And fair enough. Like we've got to be safe about how we're doing things. But I think that capability already it's not even a thing now, because we're understanding that we're learning that we can't really do without it. So it's either keep up and kind of learn how to integrate it into what you're doing, or be obliterated effectively. And it's happening with such pace and just the rapid level of acceptance across all different industries that mean we've got to keep up with it. And so I love that, whilst it's disruptive, I love that it's expanding everyone too around, my gosh, we never would have considered that was possible. I love, Sophie, like your questions that you're posing around the what if and imagine if. I think that people listening, I'm hoping that leaders take that away, because I love that those questions are serious and big questions, but there's a playful nature to them too. Because there's a real imagination, curiosity, creativity that comes with it. And you're not setting anything in stone saying, well, this is what we have to do. You're just allowing yourself to play and to imagine.
Yeah, the power of questions. And just on the AI piece, jump in the sandpit and play around with what could the world look like? And so what for us? And this is a wonderful space to really zoom out. What does this look like globally? Who are our peers? Who's embracing this 10 times better and easier than we are? And what if we did too? Just sort of giving some context to where are we and where could we be? And imagine if we not only used AI, but what would it look like if we built something? What would a product or service or whatever it is, what would it be? If our business model is sort of tethered to the physical world, what would it look like if we were completely untethered? And AI would absolutely play a role in that. And so then we really want to know, what do we do well? What's the secret behind our success? What relationships do we have? What's that special thing that we do? And when we think about that and we connect that with technology and really explore that space, we can open up ideas and initiatives that we never imagined before. And that's why it's important to do that in the sandpit.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of playing and it not yet being too serious or too bedded down. That's amazing, Sophie. Thank you. We're going to pop the links into where you publish. And I know you publish weekly on the website on Substack, but then your books too. So I'll make sure that people have got access to those, because, Sophie, and I'm not trying to blow the wind up here, but you know that you're one of those brilliant minds that you don't come across too often. And I think for leaders, just to even play with the, how could I expand? How could I think a little broader? I would strongly recommend them having a read of your work. I enjoy reading it every week. So thank you for publishing every week too.
Well, thank you so much, Rita. And I've loved our chat today. Thank you.
Likewise. Look forward to seeing you soon, Sophie. Thank you.